There we go. So thank you very much, and thanks, Tara, for that introduction. I just want to share, I suppose, 3 observations I have from my time as a councillor that I think is relevant to the whole thing about, local democracy, how democratic councils are, whether or not we should have a directly elected mayor. But I suppose just first, before I do that, I just want to ask a couple of questions. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to see a show of hands as to who knows the name of the Dublin Lord Mayor. Right, so councillors aside, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 people know the name of the Dublin Lord Mayor. Okay, how many people know the name of the Chief Executive of Dublin City Council? Whoa. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, half the room know the name of the Dublin City Chief Executive. That's interesting. And how many know the name of the Mayor of London at the moment? Okay, more people again. That's an interesting one, isn't it? And I'm actually genuinely surprised by that. Current Mayor of London isn't as well known as his 2 predecessors. For example, Boris Johnson and of course Ken Livingstone. So that is an interesting one. Now, 3 things I've noticed since I was elected as a councillor. I was elected as a councillor 8 years ago. So the very first thing that hits you as a councillor, and you spend a lot of time trying to get onto the council. You do this big campaign, you knock on thousands of doors, you meet thousands of people, you do this over months, deliver a lot of leaflets, do a lot of listening, a lot of engaging. And then what really hits you very, very fast is that as an elected rep for the local community, you have very little influence within the council structures, and that most of the influence lies with the permanent chief executive and their kind of senior management and staff. Now, I'll give you a couple of examples later as I suppose what some of that kind of centralisation of power means in a real term. But that kind of hits you quite fast as you're elected as a councillor. So anyone thinking of running for local elections, just remember, if you do get elected, that's only the start, I suppose, of the challenge that you face. The second thing you learn very much as a councillor is that the people who know their communities the best, and this is an obvious point, are of course the people who live in their communities. So even the very best council staff and council officials, and there are some that are very good, work very hard, and can be very competent, they never know the situation on the ground as well as the people who live there and see what's happening every day. And then the bit that goes with that is obviously the people who know their areas best are also the people who are best at finding solutions for problems in their area. And that generally goes. There is sometimes that the experience that people have from seeing problems that arise or issues that arise county-wide, that experience is useful for communities that don't see that. Sometimes people who are councillors or in the council structures, the staff, have a bit of knowledge in terms of government policy or how you can draw down funding or certain constraints that people have, and that's useful to put into the mix. But the best people at solving problems for their own community are the people who live there. And then the third observation, and you can see this all the time, is that trying to impose solutions on communities against their will and without proper consultation, no matter how good the solution is or is not, it just doesn't work. At best, you get some sort of a solution that people really resent. And often the people trying to impose the solution, it actually just works very badly. It's a bad idea. It's not the correct proposal. To give you one example of something that's been discussed at the moment, the Chief Executive of Dublin City Council, Owen Keegan, I think the other day flagged the idea of using some of the low quality amenity space in the city. He's saying 25% of the city is open space and amenity, some of it high quality parks, but some of it is of lower amenity value. He was saying maybe some of that should be used for housing, and in return communities would get enhanced high quality amenity space, better parks, maybe some all weather facilities, all that sort of stuff. Now if you think of an idea like that, that will never ever work if the Chief Executive of Dublin City Council tries to impose that on local communities. I can tell you that absolutely emphatically. It just won't happen, and people will not go along with it, and they won't stand for it. It is the case though, in some areas, perhaps if there's a lot of open space and people feel there's a need for more housing and they feel that not all the open space has been properly used, it is the case that in some areas or some communities, if there's a proper discussion and engagement with those communities and they feel that they're involved in the process and they feel that they might have a benefit from having better facilities and some more housing for local people. It might be the case that some communities will say, actually, that's a good idea. Never work if it's imposed top down. Or that's my prediction, it would never work if it's imposed top down. Just to give a couple of examples of kind of what the centralisation of power means in real terms. So when you walk around Dublin and you see a derelict building, there is a piece of legislation called the Derelict Sites Act that is in place since 1990. If you look around and see why are these buildings like that, is the derelict sites being used? You maybe get onto your local councillor, ask them to do something about it. The fact is that the decision on whether or not to use the Derelict Sites Act isn't within the remit of councillors, for example. It's entirely within the remit of the executives of councils. So generally speaking, my council in particular, Fingal County Council, generally speaking, it never uses the Derelict Sites Act because the executive don't want to use it and the councillors can't hold them to account on that because we're not able to give them direction on that. It's not legal for councillors to give them direction on that. So it's important, obviously, for local communities for these sites to be tackled. It's obviously a waste of resources, but as the elected reps for the councils, for local communities, we're not able to give direction on that. I'll give you a second example of where there is a lack of accountability. And one of the areas I've been working on a lot in the last couple of years is about fire safety defects in generally new housing built in the last 10, 15 years. So in my council, the council management discovered a very serious problem in an estate in my electoral area, fixed it in the units that they owned, so the social housing units, spent a few million euro fixing those units, never told the local councillors or the local community that there was a problem in this estate, where there's over 1,000 homes in this estate, never told the local councillors that public money was being used to fix a minority of the units in the estate, and I only found out about this when I effectively received a tip-off from someone and then went through a very lengthy process of asking questions to the council management about it, didn't get proper answers and eventually had to use the Freedom of Information Act and got a pile of documents eventually that high that I had to sift through, including lots of stuff that wasn't relevant to my request at all. And through sifting through all that, I began to get a picture of what actually happened. So I'll show you the concentration of power that goes on, but also the lack of accountability then because of that. How can local communities hold people to account if they don't actually have a mechanism to do that through elections? The whole idea of elections is that you vote people in that can then, if they don't hold people to account, you can then get rid of them. And if you like, and I won't talk much about directly elected mayor because the next two speakers are, but if you if you had a directly elected mayor and you vote them in and they don't do the job and they don't address things like housing or transport or homelessness, you can effectively sack them in the next election. And then that gives them the mandate to be able to have that level of accountability for the people that are working for them or working for the city. So I'll leave it at that. Just, I suppose, the final word to say, as Tara was saying, myself and Dermot were both mayors in our own councils for a year, and that in a way gives you a good insight as, how do you say this politely, as to how ineffective that role is. So there is an important part of the role in terms of being able to raise a certain amount of issues and meet community groups and support them, but ultimately you're in for 12 months, whereas the people who have the powers or concentrated in local councils are there permanently. So those kind of ceremonial mayors, don't have the kind of level of position, I suppose, where they're able to really, develop issues or policies on behalf of the people of Dublin. So I'll leave it at that, and thanks very much.